Much, Saru, and of course, great interventions in regard to young people. And we all know that a lot of young people are falling more and more into poverty. And how do we ensure that youth voices and young people's voices are central to the conversations of sustainable development goals? Moving on, I'd want to invite Paul Divakar Namala. Is a convener of the Global Forum of Communities Discriminated on Work and Decent. This is a very, very critical stakeholder in terms of leaving no one behind. And so, Paul, would want to hear your reflections, of course, the lessons learned towards successful implementation, but also perspectives working with excluded, segregated, and marginalized communities. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much for pulling this wonderful. And I don't know where I fit in this, but it's really excellent to be part of this. Three things I'd like to just mention. One, I think there is a sense of neutrality that is being built. There is a sense of equality that we're talking about. But there are certain systemic exclusions that are there for generations, and somehow we gloss over them. And I think that's a crime that has not yet been sufficiently captured. Why I say that is a crime? We talk about poverty, but we do not talk about the poor, who these poor are, who are intergenerationally being discriminated and are poor. So in the name of poor, there is a capture by the so-called communities who just happen to become poor, not just because of an institutional or generational discrimination that takes place. So we don't talk about persons of color. You don't talk about Dalits. You don't talk about Kilambola. You don't talk about several other communities, but policies are named in the name of Dalits, but Dalits will not be affected. Climate justice we talk about, but then we do not look at those communities who are again affected where they are located. And there are most of our people where I come from, we are located on the banks of the river. We are pushed into those. Where are the Roma communities in Europe? They are pushed into the exclusion. Where are the Haratin and other communities from Africa who are situated within the African society? They have been pushed into slavery, not by the the Atlantic slave trade, but there are slaves within the communities of Africa who have been there. Now, we are not figuring these communities in the SDG scores at all. Completely silent. You're completely invisibilized it. So, this neutrality, ignores that there are layers of discrimination, there are layers of exclusion, whether it is gender, whether it is caste, whether it is forms of intergenerational birth-based descent, which need to be recognized. And because of this, I think there is a trust deficit that all governments are facing, and definitely UN is facing. But the second one, which I just want to not miss out, is there is a north in the south, there is a south in the north. And we are here looking at thinking, okay, this is a northern country and this is a southern bloc. No, there is a different architecture that UN needs, which brings the southern communities or the excluded communities, whether they are in the north or south. When my country and India or when other Asian country speaks, we speak of these north-south, but then there are elite within my own country who are actually capturing us. And I think somehow at the UN, we need to pierce through this and see how we can advance so that a much global prosperity and planet sustainability can be had, and not just in the name of capturing one and few become elite.
That's such an important point, especially I want to highlight again, Paul, that you just raised. And it was something that came up this morning in the Torchbearer session as well, for any of you that were in there. Everyone takes on positions of privilege in some spaces and disadvantages or underprivilege in other spaces. And it's important to recognize as well those intersectionalities, as you said, the global north in the south and the global south in the north. And also sort of reflecting across both those conversations, resonates again with the theme that we saw in the torchbearers of just being fearlessly optimistic and ambitiously inclusive. And I think that that's really important. Paul, very quick follow-up before we go on to the next speaker. What do you think we should be doing then? So you mentioned, people are missing as part of the conversation, there's issues. Very quickly, I would just see what's one thing we should be doing and could do differently?
I think we need to have around the table in a more structured way how these communities can be brought in. Because we are continuously invisibilizing this, and it's not an accident. I think it's a willful negligence. You want to maintain this. So the structure and architecture of this to ensure that makes a point of first visualize them so that you cannot put a screen and say we don't exist. I think that has to be done within the structure of the UN.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. We're going to go to, the question of financing